In 264 BC, Rome controlled all of Italy. Sakurit, but just 2 centuries earlier, they were a regional power, nearly erased from history. Surrounded by Etruscans, savage Gauls, and the indomitable Samnites, Rome was not the predator. It was the prey. The secret to their impossible expansion wasn't luck. Why? It was a brutal, multi-generational series of wars that forged an unrivaled reserve of manpower. Yes, this is the story of how that conquest happened, one brutal war at a time. This story begins not with a republic, but with a kingdom. The traditional accounts tell us of 7 kings who ruled the city on the Tiber. These kings, all save one, carved out a small empire through constant, localized warfare. They pushed back against their neighbors, establishing Rome as the largest and most dominant city-state in the region of Latium. But this local dominance was built on a foundation of monarchy, a system that the Roman people grew to despise. The pivotal moment came in 509 BC. It was a year of revolution, a year that would define the next 5 centuries of history. Turan, the final king, an Etruscan tyrant, was overthrown and expelled from the city. In his place, the Res Publica, the public thing, was born. The birth of the Roman Republic was not a peaceful transition. It was an act of defiance that immediately triggered a series of great wars between the fledgling republic and the powerful Etruscan civilization to the north. For decades, Rome fought for its very survival, battling the neighboring cities of Etruria, who sought to restore the king, or, failing that, to crush this ambitious upstart. The 5th century BC was a crucible, a desperate struggle for control of the lower Tiber Valley, a conflict waged against neighbors in southern Etruria. Rome learned to fight, learned to organize, and learned to endure. But just as it was securing its northern flank, a new terror descended from the north, a nightmare that would haunt the Roman psyche for generations. And they were the Gauls. In 390 BC, a vast band of Gallic warriors swept down from the Po Valley. They were not an army of conquest in the Roman sense. They were a force of migration and plunder, and they were unlike anything Rome had ever faced. At the Battle of the Alaia, a tributary of the Tiber, the Roman legions, so effective against their organized Latin and Etruscan neighbors, met the Gallic charge. The result was not a defeat, it was an annihilation. The Roman army dissolved into a panicked mob. The Gauls, led by their chieftain Brennus, marched unopposed to Rome itself. The city, its walls undefended, was sacked and burned. Only the Capitoline Hill held out, a tiny pocket of resistance in a city of ashes. The gravity of the sack was profound. While the physical damage was eventually repaired, the psychological wound was traumatic. For centuries, the Metus Gallicus, the Gallic terror, would be a latent, palpable fear in Roman politics. It was a humiliation that fostered a new hardened resolve: never again. The perception of the Gauls as an existential threat remained potent until the days of Julius Caesar himself. Rome, having hit its absolute nadir, began to rebuild. its foreign policy now driven by a ruthless defensive aggression. Madhwa, but before we see how Rome claws its way back from this abyss, let me show you this incredible piece sent to me by Imperium Artifacts. Imperium Artifacts is a workshop specializing in museum-quality replicas of the arms and armor of the very warriors we discuss. The detail on this Samnite shield, from the hand-painted linen face to the bronze boss, is simply stunning. So if you are a lover of the classical world like I am, this is an excellent centerpiece for your study or a perfect gift for the holidays. Beyond this beautiful Samnite gear, their website has a vast collection of Gallic helmets, Etruscan blades, and even the copies used by Pyrrhus's phalangites. For sure, the link is in the description and the pinned comment.
Click the link in the description below.
Rome rebuilt its walls stronger this time. Reorganized its legions, adopting new tactics learned in the bitterest of defeats. Erkefrui, the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, would not be defined by the Gauls, who had faded back to the north. Instead, they would be dominated by a new relentless conflict with the people of the mountains, the hardy tribes who inhabited the Apennines to the south of Latium, the Samnites. These were rugged pastoral warriors, masters of mountain warfare, and they represented the single greatest obstacle to Roman expansion. For a time, the two powers coexisted. Rome and the Samnites had in fact concluded a formal alliance in 354 BC, recognizing each other's spheres of influence. But such treaties are merely parchment. A clash of interests, simmering distrust, and the magnetic pull of expansion soon led them to war. The fuse was lit in Campania. The city of Capua, a wealthy and powerful state, found itself under attack by the Samnite Highlanders. In desperation, Capua appealed to Rome. The resulting conflict, known as the First Samnite War, was short but decisive. Rome's intervention was successful. As a result, the Romans expanded their influence deep into Campania, securing an alliance with the vital city of Capua. This move gave Rome a foothold in one of the richest regions of Italy, but it also cemented the Samnites as their mortal enemies. This success, however, provoked a different enemy, one much closer to home. The First Samnite War was followed almost immediately by the Latin War in 340 BC. Rome's allies in Latium, the Latins, along with the neighboring Volscians, saw the Republic's growing power not as a shield, but as a cage. They saw Rome's entanglement in Campania as their opportunity. They made one final, desperate attempt to throw off Roman domination. This was a betrayal that Rome would neither forgive nor forget. The war was swift and brutal. Rome's legions, now seasoned by conflicts with Etruscans, Gauls, and Samnites, were a superior fighting force. Once again, Rome emerged victorious. The peace agreement that followed was a masterstroke of Roman statecraft. With the old Latin League as a political entity was dissolved forever. Rome did not simply subjugate its old allies. It absorbed them. Some states were annexed directly, their people granted forms of Roman citizenship. Others remained technically autonomous, but were bound to Rome by non-negotiable bilateral treaties that obligated them to provide soldiers for Roman armies. This was the model that would conquer the world. Rome had secured Latium. It had a foothold in Campania. It had defeated the Latins. Now all its focus turned south to the mountains. The years that followed were spent consolidating these new conquests. Rome planted colonies, built roads, and prepared for the inevitable, larger conflict with the Samnites. The next flashpoint came in 328 BC. War broke out between Rome and the city of Neapolis, modern-day Naples. Neapolis was originally a Greek city-state, a coastal gem of Magna Graecia, but by this time it also had a significant population of Oscans who were kin to the Samnites. The city was torn by internal factions, one pro-Samnite, one pro-Roman. The war dragged on as a siege until a pro-Roman faction within the city took matters into their own hands. They seized control and opened the gates, concluding a treaty on terms highly favorable to the Romans. Neapolis would become one of Rome's most faithful and important allies, securing its maritime access to the south. But this victory came at a price. Suorn, the Roman alliance with Neapolis, a city the Samnites considered within their own sphere, infuriated the mountain tribes, was the direct cause of the outbreak of the far larger, far more desperate Second Samnite War. Saltun, this new war began with Roman confidence, but quickly descended into the single greatest humiliation the Republic had ever known. In 321 BC, a full consular army, led by both of the year's consuls, was advancing deep into Samnium. The Samnites, under their brilliant general Gabius Pontius, fed the Romans false intelligence, luring them into a narrow mountain pass. The Romans marched confidently forward, only to find the end of the pass barricaded. When they turned to retreat, they found the entrance behind them had also been sealed. They were trapped. The battle known as the Caudine Forks was never fought. Horse of the Roman army, with no hope of escape and facing starvation, surrendered unconditionally. Gabius Pontius had the entire Roman army at his mercy. Instead of slaughtering them, he chose to inflict a symbolic wound, one designed to shatter the Roman spirit. He forced the entire army, consuls, officers, and legionaries to be passed under the yoke, a symbolic gesture of subjugation, forcing them to bow before their captors. Rome was forced to accept a humiliating truce with the Samnites. The traditional accounts tell us what happened next. The defeated army straggled back to Rome, not as returning soldiers, but as ghosts, avoiding the eyes of the populace. The city was plunged into mourning. But this was not a Gallic sack. This was not terror, but rage. The Roman Senate, with a display of characteristic legalistic arrogance, immediately repudiated the truce. They argued that the consuls had no authority to agree to such terms without the consent of the Senate and the people. They even offered to hand over the consuls who signed the treaty to the Samnites as a sign of good faith, an offer the Samnites angrily refused. The war was back on. According to these traditional accounts, Rome's revenge was swift and total. In the 2 years that followed, the Romans, driven by a desperate need to avenge their shame, supposedly reversed the setback with a series of incredible victories. This was followed by another brief uneasy truce from 318 to 317 BC. But the struggle for Italy was not over. Hostilities erupted again in 316 BC. The war was long and attritional. Rome suffered another serious setback at the Battle of Lutuli. But the Roman system was built for this. Was built to absorb losses, to replenish its manpower from its ever-expanding web of allies, and to grind its enemies down. Slowly, gradually, the Romans gained the advantage. They were no longer just fighting in the mountains. They were launching simultaneous campaigns, striking at the Samnites from multiple directions. Haste the end of the Second Samnite War, Roman military superiority was becoming undeniable. Rome's war machine was now so vast that it could afford to launch new campaigns in Etruria and Umbria at the same time it was fighting the Samnites. Fewer, they crushed revolts from tribes like the Hernici and the Aequi, further consolidating their power in central Italy. The tide turned decisively with the Roman capture of Terracina, one of the Samnites' main strongholds. With this victory, coupled with their exhaustion from decades of war, finally broke the Samnite will to fight. In 304 BC, the Samnites were forced to sue for peace. The war was over. Rome had expanded its territory and its network of alliances until it reached the Adriatic Sea, effectively splitting the peninsula in half. The Samnites were beaten, but not broken. One final desperate conflict was yet to come. Trimechir, the Third Samnite War erupted in 298 BC. The casus belli was, once again, a dispute over alliances. Narshiri, the Samnites had attempted to ally with the Lucanians to their south. When this alliance failed, the Samnites, realizing they could not defeat Rome alone, took an extraordinary gamble. When they marched their army north, their plan was to form a grand coalition, a super army of all of Rome's enemies, the Etruscans, the Umbrians, and the fearsome Gauls. It was the most dangerous alliance Rome had ever faced. The entire project of Roman hegemony in Italy hung in the balance. But the Romans of 298 BC were not the Romans of the Aelia. They were more skilled, more ruthless, and strategically brilliant. Faced with this grand coalition, the Roman consuls acted with decisive speed. They split their forces. Secondary army was sent north to invade the Etruscan and Umbrian homelands. This invasion forced the Etruscan and Umbrian contingents to abandon the main coalition army, racing back to defend their own homes. This single maneuver brilliantly separated Rome's enemies. Derbyshire, the main Roman consular army, now had to face only the combined forces of the Samnites and the Gauls. The two armies met in 295 BC at the Battle of Sentinum. Honmus, it was the largest battle ever fought on Italian soil up to that point. The fighting was apocalyptic. The Roman legions on one wing, facing the Samnites, held their ground. But the other wing, facing the terrifying charge of the Gallic war chariots, began to buckle. Outward, the line was breaking. It was in this moment that the consul, Publius Decius Mus, performed an act of devotio, a sacred ritual where he dedicated himself and the enemy army to the gods of the underworld, before deliberately charging into the thickest of the Gallic ranks to meet his end. Inspired by their consul's sacrifice, the legionaries rallied. The Roman line held, stabilized, and then pushed back. The Romans successfully defeated the combined army in a shattering victory. The coalition was broken. The Samnites, their army destroyed, and their hopes of an anti-Roman alliance gone, retreated to their mountains. But the war was not over. For 5 more years, the Romans hunted them. Yomatra, after suffering a series of relentless invasions, defeats, and the systematic destruction of their lands, the Samnites finally gave up. In 290 BC, they were forced to accept an alliance on terms imposed by Rome. They were no longer a rival. Tarku, they were a subject, their soldiers now obligated to fight and die for the republic that had conquered them. Samnite wars, which had dominated Roman life for half a century, were over. With the defeat of the Samnites, the last major Italic power capable of challenging Rome was gone. Roman expansion now continued at an ever-increasing pace. The Republic was definitively the hegemon of the entire Italian peninsula. The remaining years were a process of consolidation and mopping up. In 290 BC, the same year the Samnites surrendered, the consul Manio Curius Dentato conquered the Sabines. Sabines, an ancient Italic people, were annexed into the Roman state as citizens without the right to vote. 10 years later, Rome turned its attention north again, waging war against the remaining independent Etruscans and the Gallic tribes who had allied with them. After an initial defeat at the Battle of Arretium, Rome responded with its typical, overwhelming force. They won a total victory against the Gauls at the Battle of Lake Badima. This victory was so complete that it led to the Roman annexation of the Ager Gallicus, the Gallic land, along the Adriatic coast. Simultaneously, Rome's influence was cementing in the far south. The patchwork of Greek city-states known as Magna Graecia, long independent, now found themselves looking to Rome. In 285 BC, the Greek city of Thurii appealed to Rome for help against incursions from the Lucanians and Bruttians. Rome obliged. A Roman army marched south, defeated both tribes in battle, and significantly installed a Roman garrison in Thurii. To support this garrison, a small Roman fleet was dispatched to patrol the Gulf of Tarentum. This act, seemingly a simple police action, would trigger the final and most spectacular war for Italy. It provoked the neighboring city of Tarentum. Tarentum was a wealthy, powerful Spartan colony. It had long considered itself the dominant Greek city in Magna Graecia, and it viewed Rome's garrison in Thurii and its fleet in their gulf as a direct provocation. The Tarentines, in a fit of arrogant fury, made a fatal miscalculation. They attacked the small Roman fleet, sinking several ships, and then marched on Thurii, capturing the city and expelling the Roman garrison. Sooner, they had, in effect, declared war on a power they could not hope to defeat alone. Having provoked the full wrath of Rome, the Tarentines realized they needed a champion. They looked across the sea to Greece itself. Pyrrhus was not some local warlord. Matfernonu. He was a cousin of Alexander the Great, a Hellenistic king, and widely regarded as one of the most famous and brilliant generals of the age. He was also ambitious, dreaming of forging a great Western empire, and he saw Tarentum's plea as his golden opportunity. Pyrrhus accepted the call. In 280 BC, he crossed the Adriatic Sea and landed in Italy with a professional army of 25,000 phalangites, cavalry, and, most terrifying of all, 20 war elephants, creatures the Romans had never before seen in battle. This was not a war against tribes. This was a war against a Hellenistic king, a clash of two worlds. The Romans, confident in their legions, marched south to meet him. That same year, the two armies clashed at the Battle of Heraclea. The Roman legion, with its flexible maniples, fought bravely against the Macedonian-style phalanx, a bristling wall of 18-foot pikes. The battle raged for hours until Pyrrhus committed his final reserve, the elephants. The Roman cavalry and the legionaries themselves panicked at the sight and smell of these Lucanian oxen, as they called them. The Roman line broke. Pyrrhus had won, but he was shocked by the cost. He had lost thousands of his best, irreplaceable veterans. He famously remarked that one more such victory, and we are undone. The following year, 279 BC, he met the Romans again at the Battle of Asculum. And again, after 2 days of brutal, horrific fighting, Pyrrhus's tactical genius and his elephants won the field. And again, his losses were devastating. These victories, which should have been decisive, proved to be totally ineffective. They left Pyrrhus's army severely weakened. Worse, they failed to achieve their strategic goal. They did not and could not convince Rome to accept peace on Pyrrhus's terms. The Romans simply retreated, raised new legions from their endless supply of manpower, and prepared to fight again. Pyrrhus was winning himself into oblivion. He found himself stuck, bleeding his elite army dry in a war of attrition he could not win. With no clear end in sight, Pyrrhus, in 278 BC, abandoned the Italian campaign. He took his army to Sicily, answering a call from the Greek cities there to help them fight the other great power in the west, Carthage. He campaigned in Sicily for 3 years, leaving his Tarentine allies to fend for themselves. He returned to Italy 3 years later in 275 BC. But the strategic situation had changed. The Romans had spent those 3 years studying his tactics, training their soldiers how to counter the phalanx, and, most importantly, how to defeat his elephants. This time, when Pyrrhus met the Roman army at the mythical Battle of Beneventum, the Romans were ready. When the elephants charged, the legionaries opened gaps in their lines to let them through, then attacked their flanks with javelins, some of which had been set ablaze.